Good evening, and welcome to the Sleeping Zoo. Facts to fall asleep to. We descend now to the absolute, unforgiving terminus of the globe. The Antarctic mainland, the coldest environment on Earth, where the air itself is often denser and more abrasive than powdered glass, and the primary structural feature is not rock or soil, but the relentless permanence of continental ice. Our subject is the emperor penguin, Aptenodytes forsteri, the sole vertebrate capable of breeding in the darkest depths of the Antarctic winter. A creature whose life cycle is a continuous, calculated defiance of thermodynamic law. This penguin is not merely a bird. It is a biophysical anomaly, a thermogenic marvel, and the living embodiment of reproductive extremity, challenging every preconception of avian endurance. To understand the emperor penguin is to understand survival as a fixed calculation, a zero-sum game played out against the backdrop of absolute zero, where every choice, from the first step of the 40-mile trek to the final breath of the returning adult, is calibrated for the singular purpose of perpetuating its lineage amidst conditions engineered for death. We begin necessarily with the rigorous scientific assessment of its physiological mastery. The thermogenic miracle required to sustain life in the most hostile environment known to biology. The emperor penguin operates in an environment where ambient temperatures routinely plummet to -60 degrees Celsius, and wind chill factors push the effective thermal stress far lower, demanding a level of homeostatic regulation that borders on the miraculous. Its survival is predicated upon a suite of anatomical and biophysical adaptations that transform it from a typical bird into an insulated diving machine. The first and most obvious defense is its complex integumentary system, the feathers. Unlike most birds, the emperor penguin possesses not just one, but 4 distinct overlapping layers of feathers per square centimeter. An astonishing density of approximately 12 feathers per square centimeter. The outermost layer is composed of stiff, scaled feathers, tightly packed and overlapping like roof shingles, engineered to provide complete wind and water resistance, preventing the infiltration of frigid air and the loss of precious core heat to convective cooling. Beneath this formidable outer shell lies a thick underlayer of downy fluff, trapping a static layer of air close to the skin. This trapped air is the core thermal buffer, minimizing heat conduction through the feathers themselves. Furthermore, the skin is underlain by a remarkably thick layer of subcutaneous fat, or blubber, which serves not only as a massive, long-term energy reserve necessary for the male's fasting period, but also as a secondary layer of thermal insulation, further reducing heat loss via conduction to the surrounding environment. The thermal strategy extends beyond mere insulation. It involves meticulous, dynamic control over blood flow, a triumph of vascular engineering known as countercurrent heat exchange. In the penguin's extremities, like its short legs, feet, and flippers, the arterial blood, warmed by the metabolic engine of the core, travels immediately adjacent to the venous blood, returning from the cold periphery. This anatomical proximity allows heat to be transferred directly from the outgoing arteries to the incoming veins. Consequently, by the time the arterial blood reaches the exposed feet, it has already been cooled significantly, minimizing the heat lost to the ice, and the venous blood returning to the core has already been pre-warmed, preventing a sudden, catastrophic drop in core temperature. This mechanism ensures that the feet and flippers operate at temperatures only marginally above freezing, sacrificing the warmth of the periphery to conserve the warmth of the core, a calculated systemic efficiency. The short, stout limbs and small beak also adhere to Bergmann's and Allen's rules, presenting a minimal surface area to volume ratio, further reducing the overall potential for heat loss to the hyper-cooled air. The penguin is essentially a bioreactor, a massive dense core with finely tuned, highly restricted heat emission points, maintaining a stable internal temperature of approximately 39 degrees Celsius despite the surrounding environmental hostility. The emperor penguin's second domain is the freezing, crushing depths of the Southern Ocean, requiring a discussion of its diving physiology and the biomechanical challenge. When hunting, Aptenodytes forsteri routinely performs dives lasting over 20 minutes, reaching depths that can exceed 500 meters, far surpassing the capabilities of nearly all other avian species. To achieve this, the penguin exhibits a suite of physiological adaptations collectively known as the diving reflex. Upon submergence, the penguin initiates a massive bradycardia, or slowing of the heart rate, reducing its resting heart rate from 80 beats per minute to as low as 10, drastically conserving the limited oxygen supply. Concurrently, it employs peripheral vasoconstriction, shutting off blood flow to all non-essential organs and tissues, redirecting the remaining oxygenated blood solely to the brain, heart, and diving muscles, rationing the oxygen supply where it is most critically needed for survival and function. The bird's muscles are also specialized, containing significantly higher concentrations of myoglobin, the oxygen-storing protein, far exceeding that found in terrestrial mammals, acting as an internal oxygen reservoir that can be utilized when the pulmonary and blood supplies are depleted. Furthermore, the penguin possesses a remarkable tolerance for high levels of lactic acid, the byproduct of anaerobic respiration, allowing it to sustain intense physical effort, even when oxygen supplies are critically low. A physiological buffer against the energetic demands of deep-sea hunting. To counteract the immense hydrostatic pressure at depths equivalent to 50 atmospheres, the penguin possesses dense bones and an ability to completely exhale the air from its lungs before diving. This pulmonary collapse prevents the fatal absorption of nitrogen gas into the bloodstream that would otherwise lead to decompression sickness, or the bends, a condition that plagues unadapted human divers. The emperor penguin is, therefore, not simply a swimmer. It is a meticulously engineered, pressure-resistant, oxygen-rebreathing aquatic predator. This physiological mastery is deployed in the service of the most demanding reproductive strategy in the avian world, demanding that we next explore the life cycle and reproductive extremity. The male sacrifice. The emperor penguin is the only bird that breeds exclusively on the Antarctic fast ice during the middle of the winter, a choice driven by the need to fledge chicks during the subsequent summer. The journey begins in March, as the sun begins to fade, with the adults trekking 50 to 120 kilometers inland from the feeding grounds to established generational colony sites, a process called the walk. This migration is an obligate behavior, requiring immense energy expenditure before the reproductive phase even begins. Following courtship, the female lays a single precious egg, the size of a grapefruit, representing nearly 5% of her body mass, a massive energetic investment that depletes her reserves. Immediately after laying, the female transfers the egg to the male's feet, a delicate maneuver performed in sub-zero darkness. She then immediately returns to the open ocean, the primary feeding ground, leaving the male behind. The male's sacrifice then commences. He fasts completely for over 110 days, enduring the entirety of the dark, cold winter, relying exclusively on his stored blubber reserves. During this period, the male is solely responsible for incubating the egg, balancing it precariously on his feet, and covering it with a flap of heavily vascularized skin known as the brood pouch. This meticulous posture ensures the egg is maintained at a precise stable temperature of 37 degrees Celsius, despite the ambient air temperature being 80 degrees colder. The demands of this continuous absolute fasting are staggering. The male can lose up to 40% of his total body weight. This extreme commitment is only survivable through a unique form of cooperative thermoregulation. The huddle. The huddle is a dynamic, tightly packed formation of thousands of males, necessary to minimize the surface area exposed to the biting wind and cold, a strategy that drastically reduces the individual penguin's metabolic expenditure. The birds rotate through the huddle, with individuals on the warmer, protected interior slowly moving toward the exposed, frigid edge, and those on the edge then navigating back into the protected interior, ensuring thermal equity and survival for the entire group through continuous, slow-motion movement, minimizing heat loss due to convection. The chicks typically hatch after 65 days, just before the female's return, and if the female is delayed, the male can produce a small amount of lipid-rich crop milk from his esophageal glands to keep the newly hatched chick alive, a final, temporary resource drawn from his almost depleted reserves. The synchronized return of the females in the spring, heralded by their unique acoustic calls, relieves the famished males, allowing them to finally return to the sea to feed, completing a cycle of dependency and self-denial unparalleled in the avian kingdom. To understand the emperor penguin's role, we must place it in its hyper-specialized environment through an examination of its ecological niche and the marine food web. The emperor penguin is an obligate ice-dependent breeder and a pelagic feeder, meaning its entire life depends on the existence and stability of the fast ice for its breeding platform and on the health of the southern ocean for its sustenance. The primary diet of Aptenodytes forsteri consists of three main food sources: Antarctic silverfish Pleurogramma antarctica, which often aggregate under the sea ice, and are a key source of protein, various species of cephalopods, particularly squid, which are energy-dense, and most crucially, Antarctic krill Euphausia superba, the foundational crustacean of the Southern Ocean food web. The penguin's diving strategy and visual acuity are precisely calibrated for targeting these three groups. The deeper dives are often associated with targeting the slower-moving squid and larger fish, while shallower, shorter dives are typically focused on dense swarms of krill, which often congregate near the ice shelf boundary. The ecological role of the emperor penguin is that of a mid-trophic level predator, acting as a critical regulator of the krill and silverfish populations while serving as prey only for the massive predators of the Antarctic environment, the leopard seal and the killer whale Orcinus orca. The emperor penguin has developed sophisticated anti-predator behaviors, particularly in the water, relying on explosive bursts of speed, reaching up to 12 kilometers per hour, and coordinated group activity to confuse predators, often launching itself from the water onto the ice floe using a method known as porpoising, which creates a temporary layer of insulating air around its body, reducing friction. However, its obligate reliance on the stability of the fast ice creates a singular ecological vulnerability. The fast ice is the secure, multi-year ice that remains attached to the continent, providing a stable, solid surface necessary for the 4 months of incubation and chick rearing. Without stable ice, the colony cannot form, the eggs and chicks are washed away, and the entire reproductive cycle fails, meaning the emperor penguin is intrinsically tied to the physical state of its freezing habitat. The sheer scale of their communal existence necessitates a deep dive into their behavioral adaptations. The physics and sociology of the huddle, a system of cooperative survival unmatched in its efficiency. The huddle is not a static formation. It is a self-organizing biological liquid governed by the principles of density and fluid dynamics. During extreme blizzards and periods of intense cold, individual penguins will gravitate toward the nearest group, initiating the huddle formation. The goal is to reduce the overall convective heat loss of the community. Within the huddle, the air temperature can rise dramatically from ambient -50 degrees Celsius to as high as 37 degrees Celsius in the center, creating a life-saving microclimate. The movement within the huddle is slow and highly regulated, a form of collective locomotion. Every minute or so, all the birds take a coordinated microscopic step forward, moving the entire mass forward like a massive, crawling organism. This movement ensures that the warmest position, known as the thermal core, is cyclically accessible to every individual. Mathematical models studying huddle dynamics, which treat the individual penguins as self-propelled particles, show that the density is optimized at a packing fraction of about 87%. A level where minimal gaps exist to allow heat to escape, yet enough space remains to allow for the slow, continuous movement and rotation. Penguins on the exposed edge, experiencing the highest thermal gradient and the greatest wind chill, instinctively move toward the back of the huddle, navigating the narrow channels that open momentarily, while those in the center move toward the front, perpetually exposing themselves briefly to the cold before being reabsorbed into the mass. This constant cooperative thermal cycling demonstrates a level of altruism that is genetically coded for survival, as the long-term fitness of any single individual is directly dependent upon the survival of the entire colony. Furthermore, the huddle provides a collective system for information transmission, particularly the acoustic communication necessary for pair bonding and chick recognition, which is achieved through a complex two-voice signature that allows a penguin to locate its specific mate or chick amidst the chaotic, continuous clamor of the thousands of individuals that constitute the colony. The discovery and subsequent observation of the emperor penguin have woven a complex tapestry of human interaction and cultural resonance, explorers, science, and myth. The emperor penguin was not scientifically described until the early 19th century, but its truly intimate and grueling introduction to human consciousness came during the heroic age of Antarctic exploration in the early 1900s. Early explorers, such as the Norwegian Roald Amundsen and the British Robert Falcon Scott, encountered the bird. But it was on Scott's ill-fated winter journey of 1911. An auxiliary mission led by Edward Wilson, Apsley Cherry Garrard, and Henry Bowers became the defining historical narrative of human sacrifice for the sake of science and the emperor penguin. The team endured unimaginable suffering, including temperatures falling below -73 degrees Celsius, to retrieve unhatched emperor penguin eggs from the Cape Crozier colony. Their objective was not ornithological but embryological. They believed the embryos might hold the key to the evolutionary link between reptiles and birds. Cherry Garrard's subsequent memoir, The Worst Journey in the World, immortalized the emperor penguin not merely as a scientific subject, but as a mythic symbol of absolute stoic endurance. This early brutal interaction laid the foundation for the penguin's subsequent folk story and cultural impact. The narrative of the male's solitary, fasting vigil resonated deeply with Western concepts of self-sacrifice and paternal duty, leading to its powerful representation in modern media. Films like March of the Penguins and Happy Feet cemented the emperor penguin's status as a global icon of nature's tenacity. These modern folk stories emphasize the journey, the hardship, and the loyalty of the pair bond, transforming the raw data of physiological endurance into a relatable, emotional allegory for human commitment and struggle. In various indigenous folk traditions from the sub-Antarctic islands and regions visited by early sealers, tales of the great white bird often focused on its unique, upright, almost humanoid posture, leading to its identification as a spirit guide or an omen associated with the harsh oceanic journey, transforming the biological anomaly into a central figure in maritime lore. The emperor penguin, therefore, occupies a dual space. It is both the subject of the most rigorous biophysical study and a projection screen for humanity's most profound narratives of endurance and devotion. In the final analysis, the emperor penguin forces a sobering look at its conservation status and climate vulnerability. The emperor penguin is classified as near threatened, but this designation dramatically understates its vulnerability to the single defining threat of the 21st century: climate change and the loss of sea ice. The species is a primary indicator for the health of the Antarctic marine ecosystem. Its dependence on stable, multi-year fast ice for successful breeding means that marginal changes in sea surface temperature and atmospheric heat can lead to the catastrophic breakup of the breeding platform before the chicks are old enough to fledge, leading to total reproductive failure for an entire season in that colony. Models of global warming and its effect on Antarctic ice predict significant population declines, potentially up to 70% by the end of the century under high-emission scenarios. The mechanism of this vulnerability is precise. A slightly warmer ocean leads to reduced sea ice formation, forcing colonies to form on unstable seasonal ice that is prone to early disintegration. Furthermore, climate change affects the distribution and abundance of the penguin's primary food source, Antarctic krill. Krill rely on the algae that grows on the underside of the sea ice for their own winter food. And as the ice diminishes, the krill population declines, creating a bottom-up energetic crisis for the entire food web, which includes the emperor penguin. This chain reaction demonstrates the interconnected fragility of the environment. The emperor penguin is a creature perfected for the cold, an unyielding embodiment of cold weather survival. Yet, its hyperspecialization becomes its existential weakness. It has no behavioral or physiological mechanism to cope with warmer oceans or the subsequent loss of its icy foundation. Its magnificent, century-old, genetically coded strategy of survival, through commitment and the huddle, is rendered obsolete by a threat it cannot see, feel, or adapt to. The fate of Aptenodytes forsteri is now inextricably linked to the global management of carbon emissions, and its continuous struggle against the absolute cold has, ironically, become a measure of human responsibility for the climate itself. The emperor's reign is magnificent, but it is now contingent upon our actions, demanding that we recognize this bird not just as a marvel of evolution, but as a sentinel of planetary change. Thank you and good night.